This needs to be reinforced, but the NASCAR Cup Series this season, in terms of the competitive teams, it's a changing of the guard. When you look at the 16 that made the playoffs, 7 of them, almost half, are either a new driver that made the playoffs, a new driver crew chief combination, or a new driver team combo, and in the case of Bubba Wallace, that's all 3. So with this brand new Pandora's box of drivers and teams we never would have thought would be able to compete for the playoffs now in this 10 race fight, naturally that means you have teams and drivers that have dominated the last decade either by winning multiple races in a season, making it to the championship for multiple times, or even winning the championship like one driver in 2020. You have now a group that is in an unconventional crossroads entering this upcoming offseason. NRF Productions presents the Crossroads for the 2023 NASCAR Cup Series non-playoff teams. The Penske number 2 reminds me of that one solid oak tree that's been here for over 100 years, has endured so much, like storms, tornadoes, it's had a couple branches torn off, but even then that tree remains strong and firm in the ground, and you could say that the number 2 with Rusty Wallace, Kurt Busch, and Brad Keselowski, it's hard to go back and remember a year where this number 2 team was just horrendous. The worst I can think of was Kurt Busch all the way back in 2008, but even then, he got 5 top 5s and 10 top 10 finishes. So maybe that's why we're all in disbelief as the number 2 team has fallen down to earth like that oak tree now that a lumberjack has just swung at it and chopped it, making it fall straight to the ground. Austin Cindric has hit the sophomore slump, and you see it in the stats, especially the disparity in terms of the types of tracks. At road courses, Austin Cindric has been strong, boasting a solid 13.6 average finish. It's the short tracks and the intermediate tracks that you would usually associate the number 2 car with success, where Austin Cindric is not getting a good grasp. And that is why Austin Cindric right now has a 21.1 average finish, which would be the second worst since Kurt Busch in 2008. Meanwhile, he has an abysmal 3 top 10 finishes and 0 top 5 finishes. 0. For a Team Penske car, that is horrible, and Roger Penske is starting to see this, as for this upcoming race at Darlington, we are going to see a wholesale crew swap between the number 2 and the number 21 teams, as Brian Wilson, the guy that helped Austin Cindric really mature in the Xfinity Series and helped him win it all in 2020, is now going to be the new crew chief, not only for the remainder of the season, but likely 2024. This wholesale change includes Austin Cindric getting the number 21's car chief, engineers, and some other road crew mechanics, while you're going to have some other people like the spotter and the interior specialist that is going to stay with Austin Cindric. This is a move that needed to happen because Team Penske is a team that's prided on consistency. You're not expected to sit there and not even be in the top 20 in points. For Austin Cindric and the majestic Penske number 2, this is a failure of a season, but the good news is that you now have some seeds in place to where now you can just water them over these next 10 races, and hopefully something blossoms in 2024. For Austin Dillon, 2023 was supposed to be the year where he finally got things together, now that he had a teammate, 2-time NASCAR Cup Series champion Kyle Busch, to really push him to become a better driver, win races, and become that weekly rock in terms of a championship contender. 26 races later, if anything, Austin Dillon has taken this as an excuse now to take the back seat at Richard Childress Racing, which in fact he has openly embraced, talking about how he's happy for Kyle Busch's success at RCR. And I understand, this is his grandfather's team, of course you should be happy, but at the same time, Austin Dillon has done abysmal in terms of driving this car this year. Austin Dillon has already tied his career worst with 8 DNFs, and if he gets just 1 in these playoffs, that would be a new career high. Plus, this is set to be the worst points finish for the RCR number 3 in the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, of course, I understand this to an extent because the number 3 car got a penalty at Martinsville for having an illegal underwing component to where they lost 60 championship points, 5 playoff points, and Keith Rodden ended up being suspended for 2 NASCAR Cup Series races. Still, this shouldn't be the worst considering you have seasons like 2019, that awful reunion with Danny Stockman, and plus you have the fact to where there are no more excuses at RCR. Kyle Busch has won 3 races this season, and what is Austin Dillon doing in those races? Well, in 2 of those, he got DNFs, and this ironically sparked something that I thought was a meme where they had the results. It was at Talladega. Kyle Busch finished first, Austin Dillon finished 38th. That just seems like the disparity between the two, and interestingly enough, Austin Dillon is starting to feel like the Cal Naughton of NASCAR. Going back to how he's happy for the RCR organization, this gives me the vibes that he's fine with being the team player. Heck, we saw it at Daytona where he was more than willing to help push Kyle Busch to the victory in his first Daytona 500. I understand why he would want to help Kyle Busch because he has a Daytona 500, Kyle Busch doesn't, but at the same time, this just gives off the vibes of Austin Dillon being a guy that's fine being the sidekick to Kyle Busch. And this is sad because Austin Dillon is a driver that has talent, and yet now he is halfway through his career, or likely halfway, and to his name he only has 4 wins. And based on what I've seen from him and Keith Rodden, that might be the new norm, where Austin Dillon is just kind of there to carry the legacy. Basically, he's a driver that wants to be in the show and not be the show. The motto for Corey LaJoie for the longest time has been stacking pennies because he's a jack of all trades guy. He has a lot of knowledge about the blue collar stuff about racing. And so he brings a lot of experience and expertise and just that grind in your teeth work ethic that someone in a blue collar nature would have. In this 3rd season with Spire Motorsports, it started out well for Corey LaJoie because he was 19th in points after 7 races, and he even got a 4th place finish at Atlanta. However, things would taper off, especially during the summer where this team just could not get some solid 15th runs, and because of that, he fell way down as low as 27th in points to where now he has rebounded 1 spot after a 10th place finish in Daytona. That isn't the most notable thing about Corey LaJoie because everyone is going to be talking about how he did at Gateway when he got the opportunity of a lifetime to sub for Chase Elliott and race the number 9 Napa Auto Parts Chevrolet Camaro for Hendrick Motorsports. And in that race, he did nothing special. In fact, for the longest time, Carson Hocevar, the replacement for Corey LaJoie in this race, actually did a better job in that car than Corey LaJoie. And sure, you can say the Hendrick number 9, it hasn't been good at Gateway, especially Chase Elliott last year. He was 25th most of the day. Still, for someone like Corey LaJoie, this is a disappointment to come out in a Hendrick Motorsports car and finish 21st with all the hunger in Corey LaJoie's belly to go out there and try to get the best finish possible. For Corey LaJoie, this was mostly just the nerves getting to him because I noticed on the first lap he screwed up. He was really slow. I just think to an extent he didn't execute on that day, and that ultimately hurt him. Now, is this going to hurt his opportunities going forward? We'll never really know, and for now, it seems like Corey LaJoie's home is Spire Motorsports. For now, though, Corey LaJoie's just got to focus on Spire Motorsports, getting more top 5s, top 10s, and maybe getting into a position where he can win the Daytona 500 and really help Spire Motorsports elevate their Cup program like we saw out of Front Row Motorsports and JTG. So Chase Elliott was coming off a career year, 5 wins, making it back to the championship. We don't talk about what happened in that race, but regardless, it was a season where Chase Elliott really stepped up to the plate, especially after a 2021 where he played that second fiddle to Kyle Larson. Now, honestly, I kind of predicted this because Chase Elliott, what you had to take into account was that he, Alan Gustafson, and the 9 team, they put all their chips into 2022. They failed to get that prize, which was the Bill Friends Cup. And then you also had to take into account they did not run well in the playoffs. There were races like Las Vegas where he just didn't even have a contending car. He was 20th, 25th 5th most of the day. What I don't think any of us expected was that Chase Elliott's 2023 would be the equivalent of Jeff Gordon's 2005. The tone of the season was set when Chase Elliott broke his leg in that snowboarding accident. Now he was out for 6 races, and the mindset was that he had a chance to point his way in. In fact, after the first couple races, it was looking like Chase Elliott had an avenue on points. Then, what do you know? He decides to become a complete NPC hypocrite. Weeks after complaining about the safety of the next generation car, right rear hooking Denny Hamlin into the wall and getting himself suspended for Gateway. At that point, the mentality started to shift into he needed to go out and win a race, and this is where Chase Elliott ultimately came up short. You can say there's a lot of reasons as to why Chase Elliott didn't get the win. You can blame this on Alan Gustafson, especially with races like Pocono where he went through all these little hoops to try to get Chase Elliott the track position, all to finish 10th behind Eric Jones and Harrison Burton. Then you have Watkins Glen, where I don't know how you mess up the fuel calculations that badly, but Chase Elliott runs out of fuel, puts him a lap down, basically ends his championship ambitions right then and there. But then again, you can't put all the weight on Alan Gustafson. Was it really his fault that he got injured in a snowboarding accident and got himself suspended for wrecking a driver on the racetrack? No, it's not. In fact, the 9 made the Owners' Championship, and Chase Elliott has consistently gotten good finishes. At the end of the day, Chase Elliott missed 7 races and didn't come up clutch. And this is where I want to mention something, and that's the laps led, because even in a season like 2018 where Chevrolet was off with the Camaro, Chase Elliott still led laps. He led 325 and got 3 wins. In 2023, he has only led 41 laps, 18 of those were at Talladega. That's good enough for 20th in all of NASCAR Cup Series, and that is worse than not 1, not 2, but all 4 of the Stewart-Haas Racing drivers. And we all know how bad Stewart-Haas Racing has been this year. Chase Elliott and the number 9 team just did not position themselves to where they could win these races. They were 5th to 7th, and at the end of the day, that's what you got. 5th to 7th minus 7 races worth of consistent points to where Chase Elliott naturally missed the Drivers' Championship. Now for the rest of 2023, it's perhaps just getting ready for 2024. I doubt they make any changes with the crew chiefs, although I think it would be a smart move to maybe move Alan Gustafson to the 48 and then try Tom Gray or Blake Harrison the 9, just see what happens. Although at the same time, you don't want to make a change just because it's a change. We've seen times where things might actually get worse. This is going to be a weird year in Chase Elliott's career. It's going to be Jeff Gordon 2005. Just that one year where Chase Elliott was just completely unrecognizable as a driver. And in 2024, this team should be favored to make a rebound, especially that now all their chips are away from the table in 2023 and now towards doing better in this upcoming season. Okay, after the 2023 season, we need to question where is the mindset at for Aric Almirola. Let's go back to 2018. Aric Almirola had a year at Stewart-Haas Racing that was solid. He replaced Danica Patrick and immediately made an impact, getting 1 win, 4 top 5s, and 17 top 10 finishes. 2019, a bit of a regression, but then 2020, he goes out and leads 305 laps and gets 18 top 10 finishes. At this point in his career, he was 36, and I figured Aric Almirola was going to start being a driver that would win 2 to 3 races and become at the very least, like a Clint Bowyer, where he's a consistent threat every single year. Since 2021, that has not been the case, and I understand. 2021, Stewart-Haas Racing fell off a cliff because of the wheel templates being changed. Aric Almirola obviously got the win, but at the same time, his performance took a nosedive. And in 2020, it looked like things were getting better. Aric Almirola was top 10 in points after the first 8 races, but then slowly he goes down to 11th, down to 12th, and then completely falls off a cliff with the road course stretch, the summer heat of the season where he has 3 DNFs in the final 5 regular season races. In 2023, this has been nothing but abysmal. Only 3 top 10s, which would be his lowest since 2016, where he only got 1. And then you have his average finish, which is just absolutely horrible. And really the only times this team looked competitive were Atlanta in the spring and then New Hampshire, which both of those times Drew Blickensderfer ended up screwing up to the point where Aric Almirola blew a tire and crashed out of the race. At this point, I think it's valid to say that Aric Almirola right now just wants to be in the show. He wants to be a guy that has the prestige of being in the NASCAR Cup Series. Keep taking the Smithfield paycheck because you're just not seeing it with the results. Aric Almirola should be a much better driver. He shouldn't be all the way down in the mid-20s in points. He should be at least a playoff contender, especially with all the experience he has in the NASCAR Cup Series. There are really not many excuses to be this low in points. Kevin Harvick year after year is still in the playoff mix and he's on Stewart-Haas Racing, so why can't Aric Almirola be in this picture? That's where I get this from, and I think Stewart-Haas Racing needs to have a conversation with Aric Almirola. Or do you see yourself being a solid contender for this organization? And if that answer is no, if I were Tony Stewart, I'd come out and say, Aric, I think it's time we go our separate ways. And then maybe Aric Almirola steps back and says, you know what? I've had a solid NASCAR career. I won 3 races. It's time for me to enjoy my family and enjoy the simpler things in life. Honestly, that would be a much better outcome than sitting there and saying, you know what? I'm going to come back in 2024 and run 25th again. Next season, it is either Aric Almirola becomes the driver that we all expected him to be, at least a respectable driver that's in the mix, or he just calls it a career. To me, there's no in between. The Stewart-Haas number 14 team has been degraded so much to where you wouldn't lose any morals if an OnlyFans girl decided to create content inside or on top of Chase Briscoe's race car before the race. What this team did at Charlotte changed their entire season, because on the number 14, they put a counterfeit NACA duct on the car, which is a single source part. And in this era of the next generation car, that is a huge violation. Because of that, NASCAR, they didn't take this lightly, and they would end up giving this 14 team one of the worst penalties in NASCAR history. Johnny Klossmeyer was fined $250,000, suspended for 6 races. Chase Briscoe and the number 14 team were docked 120 points and 25 playoff points, all for just modifying a piece on this next generation car. It was at that point where Chase Briscoe's 2023 season ended. You could argue that if he wins, he'd be in the playoffs, but then again, would you really want to be in the playoffs? Honestly, if I were Tony Stewart and Chase Briscoe were ahead of Aric Almirola and about to win, I'd say, Chase Briscoe, pull over, because your season is pretty much fucked at this point. And while it's easy to say Chase Briscoe might rebound for 2023, I don't know about that, because now the cat's out of the bag. Everyone in the NASCAR industry knows this was the team that modified a NACA duct and sat there and raced with this at Charlotte. And keep in mind, this was all for a 20th place finish. They did all of this and got hammered with the biggest penalty in NASCAR history. The reputation of every person that worked on this car is now tarnished. For example, someone on the team tries to get a job elsewhere. Well, now you're going to be asked with questions like, hey, yeah, you were on the number 14 team that got that massive L3 penalty. Were you any chance a part of that? Well, if you were the person that had a part in putting the NACA duct or forgot to take the NACA duct off, how is that going to be helpful for our team in the long run? You might put us in a vulnerable position to where now we have this massive penalty. This is why I believe there needs to be some changes on the 14, because number one, obviously now everyone knows their reputation, but also you got to consider the team. There might be some resentment, because I just don't understand how you can just bullshit your way through this and forget that this NACA duct situation even happened and just go on with a happy face and try to go out there and win races. For Chase Briscoe, though, this sucks because he was kind of in the playoff mix before this all started, but yeah, just this one issue derailed everything, and it's going to be interesting to see what direction this team goes for 2024, because I feel like they've got to make some sort of change, especially after this magnitude of a penalty. the Rick Ware number 15 was expected to make a step forward, especially as the rotation car. Now, for the most part, they've been with drivers like JJ Yaley and Todd Gordon, like we're going to get to later. And you can see in terms of an owner points perspective, the number 15 isn't doing that bad. They are actually in the top 33 in the charters, so that individual charter right now isn't in the bottom 3 danger zone, unlike the number 51. This right now just seems to be the sponsorship car, because you have the number 51 with Bioheaven. They can kind of leverage who is going to drive that car, but then the number 15, it's just kind of whatever sponsorship they can piece together, and then what drivers, especially in the Ford camp, are going to be available. And so maybe eventually they can build themselves up to where they have a solid group of team sponsors so that they can go to 2 full-time drivers. Maybe Justin Haley gets this ride and they choose someone else for the 51. That's where this team is, and they're not as bad as where a lot of people expected them to be in 2023. The expectation for AJ Allmendinger was to continue to channel his male advantage of being a driver, a person that was starting to peak in his late 30s, early 40s, carry that on to Kaulig Racing to help their NASCAR Cup Series program. This season, AJ Allmendinger has brought some veteran leadership, especially to that number 16 program. To an extent, AJ Allmendinger has done the job he needed to do. Right now, he's 20th in points. He's gotten a decent amount of top 5s and top 10s. However, there's the argument that he could have done a little bit better in terms of the road courses, because that is the thing that we all expect AJ Allmendinger to exceed at. That's his bread and butter. Instead, we just haven't seen the typical road course ace that AJ Allmendinger is, a guy that's leading laps and putting himself in contention to win. Because obviously this seemed to be AJ Allmendinger's main path to the playoffs, although towards the end of the season it looked like AJ Allmendinger had an outside chance to make the playoffs. After Pocono, he was only 17 points behind Michael McDowell for the final playoff spot. You'd think that Kaulig Racing would have AJ Allmendinger focus on Richmond, getting a good starting position, getting stage points, maybe end a solid finish to help close that gap. Well, for Kaulig, they thought the better alternative was to fly AJ Allmendinger all the way out to Road America, spend 2 days there for the standalone Xfinity race, and then have him fly back on Sunday to do the Cup race, start in the back, have no practice in qualifying, and try to get the best finish. Unsurprisingly, AJ Allmendinger finished 27th in this race, and that pretty much ended all of his chances of trying to get in on points. I think for the number 16 team in 2023, they need to put all their chips centered into super speedways and road courses to where they can try to get AJ Allmendinger that victory. Because outside of that, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if AJ Allmendinger becomes the new NASCAR Mendoza line over the next 2 to 3 years, now that Chris Buescher has finally figured things out. Which is unfortunate, because I think AJ Allmendinger has a tremendous amount of talent, and if Kaulig uses that effectively, he can be that guy to be a playoff contender at the least. As a sophomore driver, we all expected Harrison Burton to make a step forward, and instead the Wood Brothers Racing, they have continued to fall further down the standings. Harrison Burton's 2023 is set to be the worst performance from a Wood Brothers Racing full-time driver since Ken Schrader all the way back in 2006. This is where the conversation begins, because some people are going to mention that the Ford program has struggled, specifically Team Penske. Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney aren't their usual selves, and then Austin Cindric, we already documented how disappointing his season has been. Then again, I'm starting to believe Harrison Burton is a liability to this 21 team. For example, Daytona. Harrison Burton was in line with the Fords. He was that third car in line, and as NBC documented, the third car is really the most important car, to where they're supposed to help the first two get together, hook up to where the line can start moving forward. Well, in stage 1, it turns out the Fords ended up fading towards the end. Toyota got a good run on them, and I think most of that is because Harrison Burton didn't do a good job effectively drafting, and he was obviously talking about how his car was loose. It wasn't handling well in the draft. And this is where I bring in Matt DiBenedetto, because the Wood Brothers, they weren't bad with Matt DiBenedetto. Matt DiBenedetto, at the least, was in the playoff picture. In fact, he in 2021, for how much of a shit show that team was when they changed crew chiefs mid-season, they had all that bad luck. Matt DiBenedetto finished higher in points than Chris Buescher, Ross Chastain, and Bubba Wallace, and look where they are at now. This is why I don't sugarcoat things. I believe Matt DiBenedetto would have won the Wood Brothers their 100th race if they would have just stuck with him. However, Matt DiBenedetto instead fell victim to what I call philosophical differences. For the Wood Brothers Racing, Matt DiBenedetto wasn't the biggest problem. It was the fact that the team really didn't have a direction they were going. They changed all this stuff mid-season. And then obviously they also had a lack of funding from Matt DiBenedetto. And that is likely why Harrison Burton is going to continue to be in this 21 until, of course, he gets an upgrade. Maybe Jeremy Bolins can be the thing that helps, but at the same time, he didn't do much with Austin Cindric, so I don't know if he's going to be that be-all, end-all to really change the trajectory of Harrison Burton and his disappointing Cup career after 2 seasons so far. Justin Haley continues to be a solid driver for Kaulig, maybe not on AJ Allmendinger's level, and some might say it's disappointing that Justin Haley's driven the next-gen car for Kaulig for 2 years, and now AJ Allmendinger in his first full-time season is doing better. Then again, Allmendinger has a lot more maturity and has a lot more experience, and Justin Haley's eventually going to get that. Plus, you have to take into account Kaulig Racing and the 31 team and how they've put Justin Haley in a vulnerable position 2 years in a row. Last year, as well documented, issues on pit road where the tire came off resulted in Trent Owens being suspended for a combined 8 races. And this season, yet again, the number 31 has gotten themselves into trouble early on in the season. They were a part of the whole louver confiscation back in March. Kaulig Racing was hammered to the point to where you and I had more points than Justin Haley. Ultimately, that penalty got rescinded because of the whole controversy with the Hendrick penalty. However, in the process, Justin Haley lost Trent Owens for 4 races, put themselves back behind the 8 ball, and so because of that, Justin Haley didn't get off to the hottest start. And honestly, that's why I believe that the ulterior motive as to why Justin Haley is going to Rick Ware Racing is because of everything that's happened with Kaulig. They haven't had the cleanest start to a season. And Justin Haley is a driver, I believe, that if he has just a rock solid foundation to where it's a team effort, to where the pit crew, the crew chief, they're doing the best job, they give Justin Haley an opportunity to thrive, he will go ahead and give you top 15, top 20 finishes. As for the 31, they now have a vacancy, and I predicted it was going to be Chandler Smith, although Kaulig Racing came out and said they have everything locked up for next year. They're just waiting to announce it, which is why I believe that it is going to be Noah Gregson. He is obviously suspended by NASCAR. And so with all the optics and trying to get him unsuspended, that's why I believe that it is Noah Gregson. They're just waiting until he officially gets reinstated to make the announcement. Front Row Motorsports is having a career year, and that is no exception with their number 38 program and Todd Gilliland. He's gotten 3 top 10s, and his average finish is a solid 21.6. Front Row Motorsports made the right decision to re-sign Todd Gilliland, pick up his option for 2024, which I'm surprised they did based on how they treated him at the start of 2023 by sidelining him for a couple races to put Zane Smith in the number 38. Fortunately, things seem to work out, and Todd Gilliland is the antithesis to the thinking that the Truck Series, there's no talent in the Truck Series. All the drivers just sit there and race aggressive. It's the Xfinity Series. That's where it's at. Based on what he's shown now, I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 to 5 years, Todd Gilliland becomes a playoff contender to where he's a guy that can start being in on points and winning a couple races. And that's why there's a lot of optimism, especially around a 38 program that has never really had it in their entire history. I'll just say this, Ryan Preece is not a NPC or non-playable character, because we have seen this driver just sit there and grind his teeth out in modifieds, sold his house just to get an opportunity to race Xfinity and get to this point in his career. Then, of course, he's been through some tough wrecks. You remember Kansas all the way back in 2020, that hard hit And then obviously the thing that stunned the NASCAR world, Daytona, when he had one of the most violent flips, at least in the next generation era. Ryan Preece fortunately walked away unscathed, and I think this crash is kind of the embodiment of his 2023 season. He's been put through so much shit, being run over by all the drivers around him, Stewart-Haas Racing not having the speed and the strength as a 4-car organization. Still, Ryan Preece continues to show up to work, try to get the best finish possible, and I just hope things work out for him, because I believe if Ryan Preece had the opportunity, he would be a driver that would win multiple races and potentially be a driver that could contend for a championship. We saw that in his handful of Xfinity starts for Joe Gibbs Racing. He won races and had them in the mix to win the Owners' Championship. Obviously, Elliott Sadler took a problem with that. That's why this 2023 season has been a disappointment outside of the short tracks, because the short tracks have been the things that he's thrived at, especially Martinsville in April, where he led a bunch of laps before he got the penalty. There's flashes, but Ryan Preece is going to need a lot more and a lot more support from Stewart-Haas Racing if he's going to make that next step and become the driver that I believe he can be. Many were thrilled to see Noah Gregson make that elusive step to the NASCAR Cup Series. He is a fun personality, someone that's energetic after winning races, a character that NASCAR needs. Well, in 2023, this season has been anything but fun for Noah Gregson and his devoted fan base. Legacy Motor Club has been an outright disaster, and that has been led by Noah Gregson, putting forth one of the worst rookie seasons in recent memory. It's to the point where in that 42 car head-to-head, Ty Dillon in 2022 had better results than Noah Gregson. That obviously isn't the most notable thing, because Noah Gregson liked an under Denis meme, and Daniel McFadden saw the opportunity to write a juicy editorial article and decided to get on to Legacy Motor Club, which resulted in Noah Gregson getting suspended by LMC and NASCAR. Eventually, Noah Gregson just said, fuck it, I want my release. I want out of this organization, and now he is going through the process of trying to get reinstated. Basically, he got Kyle Larsoned all because he liked an under the knee meme based on the death of George Floyd. Like I mentioned for Noah Gregson, I do believe he is the favorite now to get the 31 at Colleague, although for the Legacy Motor Club right now, their main priority is to focus on 2024 with Toyota, and obviously it looks like John Hunter Nemechek is going to take that ride in 2024. Because of that, now you're starting to see some weird driver announcements, like Josh Berry getting the 42, Mike Rockefeller getting the car at Indianapolis, and ironically costing Chevrolet driver Chase Elliott a chance to run down Michael McDowell. Then you've got Carson Hocevar this weekend, which will be interesting considering his performance at Gateway. The 42 is in a lame duck year, and they're pretty much counting down the days until 2024 can start with John Hunter Nemechek. For Legacy Motor Club, perhaps their biggest disappointment might be Erik Jones, considering that in 2022, Erik Jones did phenomenal. He was a standout driver with 3 top 5s, 13 top 10s, and obviously got the win in the Southern 500. Well, the Focus Factor sponsorship ended up leaving, meaning that Maury Gallagher had to put more of his own money into the 43 team, and we've seen that this Legacy Motor Club number 43 has not been able to put it together. Erik Jones is still doing solid. He has a good average finish. He's gotten 5 top 10 finishes. Still, he has not matched what he did in 2022, and part of the blame is obviously the team got a massive penalty after Gateway, put them well down into the standings to where their chances of pointing into the playoffs were pretty much done. For Erik Jones and Legacy Motor Club, this hasn't been the smoothest season, and it doesn't help that, they're in a lame duck year now that they announced in April that Legacy Motor Club is going to be moving to Toyota. 2024 is where things need to start clicking, because it just sucks that Erik Jones has all this talent, and yet he continues to get wasted on a team like the Legacy Motor Club that doesn't have a direction. They need to get their shit together, because they have the driver in place, at least for the 43. 2023. We saw it in 2022. If the ownership is strong, Eric Jones and Dave Elenz can go out and win races, and I believe that if they can just do that right, 2024 is going to be a much better year for this organization and this 43 in particular. We all left Daytona surprised that Chase Elliott, a driver that had never missed the playoffs in his entire career, was now on the outside looking in. That seemed to push aside the other storyline at Hendrick Motorsports that Alex Bowman, a driver that had never missed the playoffs as a Hendrick Motorsports driver, also found himself missing the cut for the first time since 2017 when he wasn't even racing full time. Even more insane is the fact that you can argue that Alex Bowman had a crazier year because you go all the way back to the spring when he and Blake Harris were firing on all cylinders. Alex Bowman looked to have the consistency. He was getting solid top 10 finishes and was well above the playoff cut line. Then all the controversy with the Hendrick stuff happens. Alex Bowman gets a point penalty that puts him about 8th to 9th in points. Unfortunately, the consistency started to crack, and then what do you know, ironically, Alex Bowman ends up getting an injury. It was an injury that was much more severe than Chase Elliott's, and so because of that, Alex Bowman, he really struggled in the second half of this season. You can just see in the average finish that Alex Bowman before the injury had an average finish of 10.3. That's among the most elite in the NASCAR Cup Series this season. After that, Alex Bowman averaged a 19.7, and they weren't really getting the stage points. They weren't putting themselves into position to where they were solidly above the cut line along where Bubba Wallace was in points, and so they just continued to slip further and further down the standings to where they needed to go out and win. And much like Chase Elliott, he was never really in position to do so besides arguably Michigan. So this is probably a tough time for you Alex Bowman and Chase Elliott fans, but there are two positives I see out of this situation. Number one is that now you guys have Sundays off to where you can actually, try to get a job, try to seem more employable.
You have a job? Why wouldn't I? I'm not some lazy, inconsiderate jerk who lays in bed all day.
The second thing is that Alex Bowman and Chase Elliott can now enter this 2024 season fully ready. They can put all their chips into this next season. For Alex Bowman, I think this is going to benefit him a lot because now he can develop his chemistry with Blake Harris a little bit more. He can fully recover from his injury and just get past this awful 2023 season where he lost his dog. He's been through so much adversity. There's also the argument that this could be the time to do a team swap to where Alan Gustafson goes to the 48 and then maybe Blake Harris goes to the 9, but obviously the number 9 is in the owner's battle, so that won't happen. But I think at the end of the day, there's not really that driving reason to change things unless you just want to see change. And obviously for Alex Bowman's case, you want a more proven model of consistency, which is Alan Gustafson, to help cure or help fix the biggest flaw in Alex Bowman, and that is consistently being a driver that can contend every single week, because that is the main reason why everyone calls him a hack, because you had seasons like 2021 where he just didn't have the consistency. Fix that, and I believe that Alex Bowman can become the driver that we all expect him to be and have a season like William Byron this year where he just puts everything together. The Rick Ware Racing number 51 came into the season with not a lot of expectations because, you have Cody Ware returning, and a lot of people were just downright stunned that Cody Ware would, as a mental health advocate, go out and physically assault a woman and potentially give her trauma of her own. Well, I really wasn't surprised, but everyone else was just stunned. How could Cody Ware do such a thing? Not only did he ruin his NASCAR Cup Series career, but he also put the 51 in a bind, although they've had some pretty big names drive this car. Matt Crafton subbed in at Bristol. Zane Smith ended up doing a race at Martinsville. And then you had Ryan Newman come back. This was his first foray with the next generation car. He hasn't done the worst, at least for Rick Ware standards. And then Cole Custer has done a couple races. That to me is a good move considering his expertise with the next generation car. I assume that Rick Ware Racing learned a lot, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with this 51 car. For a driver like Ty Gibbs, it seemed like he had all sorts of different expectations, because you had some people talking about how Ty Gibbs just needed to keep the nose clean and not make so many enemies like he did in Xfinity. On the other hand, you had some people saying, who cares? Because Ty Gibbs, when all the pressure was on him after Martinsville for dumping Brandon Jones, he went out and shut up all the haters to go win the Xfinity championship. Plus, this is Joe Gibbs Racing, and historically a team that has done really well, making it to the championship for 5 seasons in a row and winning 2 titles with Kyle Busch in 2015 and 2019. For my consensus, I would have to say that Ty Gibbs is having a solid rookie season. When you look at his stats this season, Ty Gibbs has done a respectable job. He has gotten some top 5s, top 10s, and he hasn't gotten a lot of DNFs, only 3, so he's keeping the car clean. He's not getting into too much trouble. Then you have to take into account that Ty Gibbs has improved since the start of the year. In the first half, he was 20th to 23rd in points. Now we're getting to the point where Ty Gibbs is getting top 5, top 10 finishes, to the point where in these last couple weeks he was in the conversation as to who was going to get that final spot on points. So things are getting better, and I think the main area that this 54 team and Chris Gale need to focus on is getting better at intermediates. When you break down how Ty Gibbs has finished at each track, you can see the road course program is really good. The short tracks, he's doing solid at 14th. However, that 18.9 at intermediates, especially for a Joe Gibbs Racing driver, is disappointing, but it's something that I expect to get fixed in this second season. For next season, Ty Gibbs is positioning himself to have a strong sophomore season, win multiple races, and heck, I wouldn't be surprised if he steals a race like the Charlotte Roval this season to end up getting that first career victory and putting an exclamation mark on a decent rookie season so far. Spire Motorsports decided to go with a second full-time driver alongside Corey LaJoie, and this is where they go with Ty Dillon. You just see it in the stats. Ty Dillon really hasn't done much for Spire Motorsports, and in fact, he's over 100 points behind the next best guy in the driver standings that has run a full season. If I were Ty Dillon at this point, I don't know why he is still in the Cup Series. Maybe it's because he just doesn't want to accept the fact that he needs to go down to Xfinity to try to better things in his career, but I believe he would be doing so much for his career to try to get a top tier Xfinity ride and try to rebuild what has kind of happened to him over the last 2-3 years ever since Germain shut down. Do I expect that to happen? Probably not, as I predict that either Ty Dillon's going to be with this 77 for his second season, or he is going to join Live Fast Motorsports in 2023. This was an organization that not long ago was in the same conversation as 2311 Racing and Trackhouse. However, even as they have switched to Richard Childress Racing, they are not getting the results. They are dead last in the charter standings, not even in the mix to get out of that top 33 battle. They are just the lowest of the low right now. Honestly, I believe some of that right now is because they don't have a committed driver that they are going all in on, because you have BJ McLeod and Josh Bilicki that kind of just split the season, but I don't think you're doing a good service to the 78 when you're just constantly changing the driver. If you're Live Fast Motorsports for 2024, you need to go out and get a guy like Ty Dillon, someone that has experience with the next generation car. Another season like this, and who's to say that NASCAR won't revoke the charter, especially with talks about 2311 wanting a charter, Trackhouse wanting a charter, maybe Junior Motorsports. It just doesn't look promising, especially if they just do nothing instead of actually getting a guy that they can commit to full time. 2023 was seen as a year of stability for Daniel Suarez, because this was year 3 with he and Travis Mack at Trackhouse. Then you had all the momentum from 2022 where Daniel Suarez had a career year, Trackhouse Racing being on a high with Ross Chastain's Hail Melon and making the championship race. To start 2023, it looked like Daniel Suarez was not skipping a beat. He had some top 10 finishes and was solidly in the playoff battle, but as we would see in the spring, we would start to see an alarming disparity between the Trackhouse cars, because while Ross Chastain was out here competing for wins and making a lot of enemies, Daniel Suarez spent a lot of Sundays running 10th to 15th, and on other Sundays just having a lot of misfortunes. The best chance for Daniel Suarez to win a race was obviously Atlanta. He was second in position to win, but the rain just came too soon and William Byron ended up winning that race. It looked like Daniel Suarez was in position to get in on points, but then Pocono crashing early in that race and Watkins Glen completely choking when he had the track position. He was in position to gain some points on Bubba Wallace, but he of course had to make a mistake in the most critical position. Daniel Suarez now finds himself in a familiar position below the cut line as his teammate is now competing for the NASCAR Cup Series championship. This is where I'm honest, because Daniel Suarez has been through so much shit throughout his career. It's good to see him have that stability, but at the same time, he needs to start performing. This is a disappointment. This is almost an absolute failure, because there was an expectation for Daniel Suarez to do something this year, and he has not been a driver that has won races and made the playoffs, and instead that disparity between the 1 and the 99 is further than their disparity in the number. That's why I say 2024 is a critical year. He and Travis Mack need to get something going, because now you have Shane Van Gisbergen starting to gain some traction. I mean, even he has won a race this year, and Daniel Suarez running all the races hasn't. And I would think, unless Trackhouse is going to try to get a third charter, Daniel Suarez is going to be the guy that they might replace if he disappoints yet again. So that's my video on the Crossroads. Like I said, man, that was a tough one to record. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video like I enjoyed making this. So anyways, this is Nathan for Digital Gashouse. Life's a beach, and then you drive.